Get Rich Education is brought to you by Reef Oil and Gas Companies, partners in American energy production for world consumption.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Hey, welcome to Get Rich Education, Show 15. I am your host, Keith Weinhold. I've been grateful for your listener mail. You've told me that one of your greatest pain points is getting money for the deal. So I listened. I've got the guest, not on this episode, but the next episode, that can tell you about all the angel investor money, venture capital, and crowdfunding sources for how to get money for your business startup or your next real estate deal. If you don't have a lot of money for a deal, I've also told you about how you can buy income real estate by pooling other people's money together to fund the deal through real estate syndication. And I told you about the seminar that tells you how to do this in Las Vegas, February 6th and 7th. I will be attending that, so I hope to meet you there. But prior to you doing more big deals and getting the money so that you can create more money for yourself, it's important to discuss protecting what you have or protecting what you will buy. And today we have our first appearance of an elite Robert Kiyosaki Rich Dad advisor to tell you about doing just that. When we come back, Garrett Sutton is going to tell you about the right asset protection and corporate structure around what you now own or plan to own in the future, right here on Get Rich Education. Are you looking for an investment with the potential to offer monthly cash flow and tax advantages? While prices fall at the pump, now could be the time to invest in oil and gas. In business for nearly 30 years, Reef Oil and Gas Companies has endured price fluctuations and understands the importance of creating opportunities by purchasing oil and gas properties during distressed times. Primarily focused on the Bakken Three Forks of North Dakota and the Eagle Ford Shale of South Central Texas, Reef's model is designed to generate revenue and provide tax advantages from the production of oil and natural gas. For more information on this investment opportunity, go to reefogc.com.
Hi, this is Tom Hopkins, and I can't tell you how smart you are to be with Get Rich Education and make these ideas you.
You might have heard of today's guest, Garrett Sutton, because he is quite famous. He's highly sought after as a guest speaker, and he serves as a member of the elite group of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad advisors. Garrett has authored a bunch of successful books, including Start Your Own Corporation and Loopholes of Real Estate. Welcome to Get Rich Education, Garrett Sutton.
Thank you, Keith. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
In my mind, you've always sort of occupied this somewhat unique space. You're a corporate attorney in a very prominent level. You're also a real estate investing aficionado and author. So how did you get into occupying such a unique niche in the industry?
Well, it started out by going to law school. I went to Hastings Law School in San Francisco. It's the University of California's law school there. And I found myself interested in corporations right off the bat. So that was something that just came to me naturally, as opposed to workman's compensation or constitutional law. And in doing corporations, along the way, I got my California real estate broker's license when I was living in California, because I had a lot of corporate clients asking me about real estate. So I figured the best way to be able to advise them was really to learn the nitty-gritty of real estate. And so I started out doing the broker's license, and then that led to my investing in real estate. And so my wife and I, one of our retirement strategies is to have several properties which will cash flow. And so that is, part of my goal. And many of my clients who come to me from Rich Dad and other places have the same goal. So it makes it really enjoyable to talk to these people about what they're doing, what I'm doing. And so it's been a lot of fun, actually. It's quite enjoyable to assist people in this regard.
It is, because as we know, investing in real estate is a life-changing vehicle. So you discussed some of your clients. I think you have one set of clients that everyone's heard of, Robert and Kim Kiyosaki. How did you get to know them?
Well, it's just, blind luck. It was great that there was a CPA here in Reno that got to know Robert, and they were looking for a Nevada attorney that did asset protection, and she was nice enough to refer me to Robert. And it was funny that Robert and I both played rugby, and that was an immediate bond. And we had several mutual friends in the rugby world. So, it's just been really enjoyable the last 15 years working with Robert and Kim, not only on their personal matters, but traveling the country and spreading the word as to the Rich Dad principles and my segment within that being protect your assets. When you get started, you're building your net worth, you've got to think at the same time, how do I protect it?
So what is going on in the world of asset protection these days?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Keith, because there are three things I want to mention. There's a new case out of Wyoming that says if you have an LLC that you don't properly capitalize, meaning you don't put enough money in to satisfy the obligations that you enter into, even a strong state like Wyoming will pierce the corporate veil. And that's what they did in the Green Hunter case. So that's kind of big news in the asset protection world. As well, we're starting to see more and more courts rule against asset protection for single member LLCs. When you have an LLC, the owners are known as members. In a corporation, the owners are known as shareholders. But in an LLC, if you have a one owner, a one member LLC, some states don't accord the asset protection. And in response to this, Nevada and Wyoming have, on the other hand, provided asset protection in their statute for single member LLCs. But in other states, we're starting to see a trend away from protecting single member LLCs. The third thing I'd like to bring up, Keith, is a lot of people are looking at the self-directed IRA and investing in real estate through their self-directed IRA. They take the next step of saying, I don't want to pay the trustee to manage this real estate, so I'm going to form an LLC that will be owned by my self-directed IRA, and I'm going to manage the IRA monies on my own through that LLC. We're starting to see the IRS gathering information on this, and I predict within the next 2 years or so, there's going to be a crackdown on this practice. So your listeners should be aware that, it just, when it sounds too good to be true, maybe it is, the idea that you can manage your retirement monies through a checkbook IRA or the checkbook LLC, maybe too good to be true. I think something is coming with regard to the IRS and the checkbook IRA.
So listeners, if you listen to Garrett a little bit and you pick up on what he's saying, laws and policies change. So this is a dynamic field. It's not necessarily a set it and forget it sort of passive activity forever. You did mention something there about piercing the corporate veil. What does that mean for my listeners that don't know?
Well, that's a good question, Keith. I really should explain it more fully because it is important. When you set up a corporation or an LLC, you're doing it in part for the limited liability it affords. Meaning, if the corporation gets sued, someone suing the corporation can get what's inside the corporation, but they can't get what's outside it, your personal assets. Now, if you don't follow the corporate formalities, if you don't issue stock, if you don't pay the filing fees to the state, in this new case in Wyoming, if you don't properly fund the company, a court can pierce the veil, meaning they go through the limited liability veil of protection and assess the claim against the corporation to the shareholders directly. So this is not a good thing. Piercing the corporate veil sounds painful, and it is.
Now, some listener might be wondering, well, I don't live in Wyoming. What does Wyoming have to do with me? I live in New York or Kentucky or Florida. So, what about that? How can a resident of Oklahoma be protected with legal changes in Wyoming?
The reason I bring up Wyoming is each state has its own veil piercing statute. They will pierce the veil in all 50 states. And it's kind of interesting, Keith, when people do attempt to pierce the corporate veil, it is successful almost 50% of the time.
That's scary.
Which means people aren't following the formalities. So Oklahoma will have its own veil piercing statute, Florida, New York, wherever you are. So you have to understand what each state wants to see, but there are some common things among all the states. So you have to pay that annual filing fee, you have to do your minutes. And I talk about it in the book, Run Your Own Corporation, as well as Start Your Own Corporation. The importance of the corporate veil and maintaining it is covered in those books.
For those that are interested in starting their own business or getting started in real estate and investing, which are two separate activities, what is sort of the best structure for that? A C corporation, an S corporation, an LLC?
You know, there's no one right answer. Typically for real estate, it's going to be an LLC, perhaps an LP, a limited partnership. For a business, there could be reasons why you would set up an LLC or a corporation. The LLC has a lot of flexibility. You can tax an LLC however you want. It could be taxed as a C Corp, an S Corp, a partnership, or a disregarded entity, meaning it flows right onto your personal return. So the question for real estate is it's either an LLC or an LP. The question for a business is a little bit more complicated, and that's why I like getting on the phone with people and just talking to them about their specific situation.
Yeah, that's probably an it depends answer if there is one. But if I can just give one specific situation, one idea and piece of information that I have given my listeners that can be a great springboard to their wealth, and it's also how I began when I bought my first fourplex 12 years ago, is to consider buying a fourplex building with an FHA loan, putting 3.5% down, which is 28-to-1 leverage, living in one unit, renting out the other 3, and you only have to own or occupy for a year. So what about somebody that follows that course of action and buys a fourplex owner-occupied with an FHA loan? Is there a specific course or entity protection that's best for that? Or
Well, a couple things. When you buy that first piece of property, any piece of property, you always want to have insurance. So if you have the LLC in place, you're still going to have insurance. So insurance is the first line of defense. Now, when you get that loan, Keith, pretty much you had to get it in your individual name. And title with that FHA is going to be in your individual name.
Yeah.
I have clients, and I do this myself, where you take title in your individual name, and then you transfer it to the LLC. And with regard to the lender, is it better to ask permission or forgiveness? If the lender keeps getting the mortgage payment pursuant to an LLC bank account check, they're going to be okay with it. If they're not, and it rarely happens, I haven't even seen it happen. If they come back to you and say, hey, this was a sale of the property and we have a due on sale clause, pay us all the money. Here's the language that the FHA actually accepts, and it's called continuity of obligation. So in your situation, Keith, where you bought that property and then you transfer it into an LLC for the better protection. With the FHA, they have a continuity of obligation. In other words, you've signed a personal guarantee. That doesn't go away when you transfer it into an LLC. You've given them a first deed of trust on the property. That doesn't go away when you transfer it into an LLC. So there's a continuity of obligation. You're still responsible for that. So that would be the magic words to use. And then, if you run into a situation, I haven't seen it, but it could happen. You run into a situation where the lender is so torqued that they're going to call the note and everything. You just transfer it back in your individual name and call us because we have a second strategy you can use.
Yeah, I've never learned of negative consequences from the lien holder when someone changes title from their personal name to an LLC either. I hear it's always a threat, but it's never actually followed through upon.
As long as they're getting paid on a monthly basis, why are they going to call a performing loan?
When one goes ahead and sort of decides what is most important to them in corporate formation, I kind of think that there are at least 3 things to consider. There's How important is asset protection to you? How important is the tax treatment? And then how important is your anonymity? Can you talk to some of those trade-offs a little bit?
Sure. I mean, if you can, I like all three. So, we can get an LLC that will give you the asset protection. As I mentioned, the LLC is very flexible in terms of the taxation. You can have it taxed however you want, but typically with an LLC owning real estate, you're going to be taxed as a partnership, or if it's a one-owner LLC, as a disregarded entity. The tax as a C or an S corp isn't best for real estate ownership. And then the anonymity, for me, the first two are more important than the anonymity. The LLC that we set you up in is going to be strong. I want you to be able to walk into court and say, Your Honor, this property's in an LLC, and the state provides for the charging order protection. However, if you do want the anonymity, the state of Wyoming does not list the owners or managers of LLCs on their website. So with Wyoming, you get great asset protection, no state tax. So we're not going to put you into a great state that has a high tax. So good asset protection, no state tax, the flexibility of how you will be taxed. And on top of that, with Wyoming, you get that anonymity because they don't list who the owner is.
So if I follow along correctly, it sounds like no matter what state someone resides in, they can use the Wyoming LLC as the holding company for their individual states that they reside in's LLC.
Absolutely. So, for example, you have a property in Alaska, and we use an Alaska LLC to be on title for your 12-plex. And then for that extra measure of asset protection and privacy, we have the Alaska LLC owned by a Wyoming LLC, which in turn is owned by Keith. The beauty of this structure is, say you go to Pennsylvania and you buy a property there. We have a Pennsylvania LLC owned by the same Wyoming. So we could have the Alaska LLC, the Pennsylvania LLC owned by the one Wyoming. We don't have to set a new Wyoming up every time.
One thing I recommend to my audience is the importance of one's return on time. And your return on time is significantly enhanced when you find that vital property manager on your team. So when an investor has a property manager in place and there's I'm thinking about ice in Anchorage here in January. Say there's a slip and fall in the parking lot. In Anchorage parking lots, I think people spend more time horizontally lying down than they do with traction standing up on them. Who's responsible for slips and falls or events like that? Is that me or is that my property manager?
Well, the property manager is your agent. And so you give them the authority to manage the property, but you can't transfer the liability to them. So you are still responsible as the property owner. Now, if the property agent intentionally, was causing people to get hurt, you may have a claim against them. But in the traditional setting, you cannot disclaim your liability by saying the property manager was responsible. You're the owner. You're ultimately responsible.
There are other layers of insurance out there. We talked about some of them. One that some people don't know too much about is something called umbrella insurance. What are the liability limits generally of umbrella insurance, especially when that has an intersection with starting your own corporation or owning investment real estate?
Well, I like the umbrella policy. So typically how it works, if you have your home and auto with the same insurance company, let's say it's Farmers, you can ask them to provide you with an umbrella policy of insurance, which covers not only your home and auto, but other activities. And you can list, in many cases, up to 4 extra parcel numbers under that umbrella policy. And, the policies are pretty inexpensive. In Nevada here, they're only $400 for an extra $1 million in coverage. And so you could have $3 million. I have a client who has a $20 million umbrella policy. Now, that is for your home and auto and extraneous activities. You can also get a commercial umbrella policy for your real estate. So it's important to have a good insurance broker on your team, and you want to talk to them about that umbrella policy. I like having it in place because that's what the attorneys know how to get at. Attorneys know how to get at insurance monies. If you have enough there, and if the claim for some reason exceeds the insurance, and all your other assets are in LLCs and are protected, the attorneys have a tougher time getting after those assets. So I like having insurance and umbrella insurance as kind of the pot of red meat for the attorneys to go after.
You don't offer umbrella insurance at your company, right?
No, I'm not a licensed insurance agent.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, see, I just kind of want to tell my listeners that, Garrett is dispensing ideas and information in a pretty impartial way here. He's recommending a product that he can't even sell to you, okay? So I just want to point that out.
There is a conflict. If I'm your attorney, I shouldn't be selling you insurance because that's a conflict of interest. That's not fair to the client.
Well, with all these protection layers, can one really overdo it too often? I mean, if they have 5 different duplexes, do they need 5 different LLCs? Is that even desirable? And what kind of layers of protection for those could one choose from?
That is a judgment call. If you're going to have 5 properties, you have the choice of having 5 separate LLCs. You have better asset protection that way because a suit against one property means a tenant suing you can't get at the equity of the other 4 properties. Now, we have states like California where it's $800 per year per entity. And some people will say, I'm not going to set up 5 separate entities and pay $3,000 to the state of California. I might set up 2 entities and have 2 in one and 3 in another. It's a judgment call. My job is to give you your options and then you make a decision.
What has real estate personally done for you? What kind of change has that made in you and your family's life?
Well, it has brought on, extra work. People investing in real estate should know that this isn't a mutual fund. This is something where you're running a business and it's extra work. But my wife and I certainly believe in real estate. It's part of our foundation for retirement. We have some of these properties on shorter notes so that when we retire, they're all paid off. It's been good. I mean, I sleep better at night knowing I have real estate rather than being in the stock market. I've never been a stock market person. I understand real estate much better. Conceptually, I like seeing the property. I like being able to touch it and know it. Real estate has just always been a good fit for me as opposed to the other options that are out there.
Well, it has for me too. There's just so much more that you can control. And it's sort of interesting. An active investor, one that's actively interested in investing, can often produce passive income, whereas a passive investor that just doesn't really care and just has things off in their 401k has to keep producing active income, meaning they typically have to stay at work longer because they haven't produced the cash flow. Are there any particular real estate markets that you like to invest in, whether that's geographic or property type or equity structures versus debt structures? Or
I live here in Reno, Nevada, and I am one of those people who likes to invest close to home. I invested in Reno 10 years ago, and things were great until this little bubble came about and popped. So, it's been challenging in the Reno market, but it's coming back. There have been a lot of major announcements of companies moving into this area, including Tesla. So there is, things are on the upswing here. But for me, whether it's booming or not, I just like having the real estate close to home. I'm not one to get on an airplane and travel across the country to see my real estate. So it just makes sense. It's funny, here in my office building in Reno, I can look out the back steps and there's a property I own 2 blocks away. So it's pretty close. So that's always worked for me, but everybody's situation is different. I have some clients that they feel that Idaho is the next place and they're willing to go there from across the country. And it just depends on what suits you.
Wow, Garrett can look out the window from his office at one of his properties and almost literally see the cash flow. That is beautiful.
Not yet.
Garrett, a lot of people achieve success with owning their own business and investing in real estate, but to really take it next level and go from success to significance, that's something that even fewer people have. That seems to be something you've achieved. So what kind of outcomes has this had for you and your family? Vacations or foundations or volunteering, luxuries? What's it done for you?
Well, 2 things. I would say that working with Robert Kiyosaki and and traveling around the country and being able to provide, clear advice to people on how to protect their assets, that has really been quite enjoyable. Traveling with Robert and the Rich Dad Advisors, that for me is significant. It has just been a joy.
Yeah, I think Garrett's being a little bit modest about some of the volunteer work he does for the Nevada Museum of Art and the American Baseball Foundation and some other organizations. I've got a question for you. You know about both starting a corporation and investing in real estate. So with that in mind, if you found yourself in an elevator for 1 minute with a young 27-year-old investing enthusiast, and they asked you, Garrett, what should I do to improve my financial future? What would you tell them?
I would say read up for 3 months. Spend your time reading the books that you need to read, but then at some point, you've got to do it. You've got to go out and invest in that first property and just know that you're going to make mistakes. And you're going to make a few mistakes like I did, like most people do, on that first property. But you're going to learn more from that activity than you will from reading a book. At some point, yes, you want to read, you want to have that foundation of knowledge. But, as Nike says, just do it. Just go out and do it. If you do this at age 27, oh my gosh, you will be in great shape by the time you're 45.
Yeah, and I know I get listener mail from people younger than that, and they're listening to shows like this, educating themselves, and I'm really impressed. And that's really aligned with Get Rich Education's mission. Number 1, educate yourself. Number 2, act. And number 3, you're going to live like no one else can because you did what no one else would. And you do make mistakes. I tell people that stumbling blocks and stepping stones really look very much alike when you get going.
That's good.
What other questions should I have asked you but didn't that you would like to tell us about?
Well, I think, Keith, one of the big messages of Robert Kiyosaki and his advisor group is to build a team. You really need to have that team. You don't have to know everything about asset protection. You don't have to know everything about taxation. You have team players that will come in and help you. And there are plenty of good people out there willing to assist you. And I always encourage people to, interview people. If you meet with a CPA that you just don't feel comfortable with, go meet with another one and find people that are willing to be on your team and willing to provide the expertise. Now, you've got to pay them. There's got to be a proper exchange. But if you pay these people and they're on your team, it's just going to make your life so much easier to accomplish what you really want to accomplish.
Why don't you let us know how our listeners can connect with you and find out more about you, Garrett?
Well, Keith, our website is corporatedirect.com. And you can also call the 800 number, 800-600-1760. And the incorporating specialists are great. Cammie, Lisa, and Genesis will talk to you. You can get on the line for 15 minutes and talk to them about what you need. And then if you want to consult with me, we can arrange for that. I charge $175 for half an hour. And usually in half an hour, we can get all your questions answered. I'm not going to keep you on the line so I can get you to $350. I mean, in half an hour, we can be done. So we try to make it really easy for people. We do offer, I believe, a high level of service. A lot of places, when you pay for that formation, somehow they know you've paid and they'll never answer the phone. And we will answer the phone to answer your questions throughout the whole process.
Hey, well, it's been great, Garrett. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. I think my listeners are really going to find this insightful.
Well, thanks, Keith. And it's been a pleasure talking to you and your listeners, and best wishes in your investing and as well in their investing.
Well, the thing I like about Garrett is his clarity. He doesn't try to make things complex with a whole lot of legal speak. He's concerned with things like cost effectiveness for the investor, too. Most attorneys will just tell you, they're like, absolutely, go ahead and put every one of your rental properties in its own individual LLC. Well, you could. When you do that, every one of those has a cost, a registered agent, minutes to maintain, its own checking account, its own credit card, all of that. Garrett's answer about whether you should put every property in its own LLC is kind of more of a it depends. Garrett's just a great communicator, and think about it, that's what you want if you are going to consult somebody. $350 an hour is a high rate to pay if you're like a boss paying that to someone working for you 40 hours a week. But if you get a hold of Corporate Direct and the Sutton Law Group, let them know that you learned through them at Get Rich Education. I mean, $175 for 30 minutes with Rich Dad's advisor, Garrett Sutton, so that he can consult you on your exact situation. That's just amazing. That's like a no-brainer to me. And here's an even better approach for you. Why don't you just consider first reading his book, Start Your Own Corporation? That way you're going to elevate your understanding and you'll really have a more efficient conversation with Garrett, knowing just what to ask and making the most of your 30 minutes that way. Check out Garrett's site at sutlaw.com. That's SUTLAW.com as Corporate Direct is going through a redesign. I'll go ahead and put that in the show notes for you. So, wealth building is exciting. You want to collect rent checks. That's the sexy part of investing. Few want to talk about risk mitigation, but the time to get this in place is now. You can't put your seatbelt on after the car accident and still get protected. You have to have it in place before there's an accident to get the benefit. And if you've already got property in your own name, it's not too late. A potential plaintiff attorney can even tell if there's a lien on the property so they can tell how much equity is in a property. I talked in episode 6 about having a low equity position in a property is one asset protection strategy. So build a fortress around your real estate empire or your business startup with the right structure, and you may not even have a case come against you in the first place. Hey, next episode we'll talk about how to get connected to the right people and the right places so that you can get money for your deal. Until then, don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to the Get Rich Education podcast, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.